They told me to take down the only thing keeping my family safe, the generator I installed after the last blackout. The HOA claimed it was an eyesore and a violation of community standards. But when the next outage hit and the clubhouse lights mysteriously stayed on, they came knocking. What they didn't realize was that their emergency systems, yeah, those were running on my generator too. And I had receipts. You won't believe how this all turned out. The blackout that started everything. The summer blackout had scorched its name into our community's memory. It was mid-July, and the sun had been relentless for days, pressing down like a furnace lid. At first, the warnings came from the utility company, a rolling blackout due to excessive power demand. But then things turned serious. Transformers blew, power grids collapsed, and just like that, the neighborhood went dark. For most, it was a brief inconvenience, but for families like mine, it was a crisis. My name is Alex Garrison. I'm a systems engineer and a single father of two, Josh, 10, and Ellie, 6. We'd only moved into this neighborhood this months ago, after my late wife passed. I wanted stability, a good school district, and a quiet place for my kids to rebuild their lives. What I didn't expect was that the real threat wouldn't come from crime or nature, but from the HOA, the Homeowners Association. During that first blackout, we barely managed. I used every trick I knew to keep our small home bearable. Cold towels in the freezer before the outage, battery-powered fans, ice baths for the kids. But I knew I couldn't let that happen again. So I made a decision. I purchased a mid-size backup generator. Not the bulky, oil-leaking kind that rattles the whole street, but a modern, whisper-quiet hybrid that could power essential systems: fridge, lights, fans, my daughter's nebulizer, and internet, because my remote work kept the bills paid. Installation took me 2 weekends. I carefully placed it behind my garage, shielded it with soundproof fencing, and added plants to mask its visibility. From the street, you'd never know it existed. But apparently the HOA did. It started with a note on my door, one of those passive-aggressive ones printed on HOA letterhead and sealed in a plastic sleeve. Dear Mr. Garrison, it has come to our attention that you have installed a generator in your yard. Per Community Guidelines, Section 4A, all external power equipment must be approved by the board. Your generator does not comply and must be removed within 14 days. Failure to comply will result in daily fines. Thank you for your cooperation. South Maple Community HOA. I blinked at the letter. Seriously? I'd read the community guidelines before moving in. They made no mention of prohibiting generators, only a vague line about obstructions to communal harmony, whatever that meant. I called the HOA number listed and asked for clarification. A woman named Cheryl, the HOA secretary, answered. Generators aren't allowed unless pre-approved, she said flatly. Pre-approved? It's not visible from the street and it doesn't make noise, I argued. Plus, during the last blackout, people could have died. These things aren't a luxury, they're a lifeline. Well, the board voted, she said. It's considered a disruption. I laughed. A disruption? To what? Your peace of mind? She didn't laugh back. You'll be fined starting Monday if you don't remove it. Click. At first, I debated complying. The last thing I needed was a legal fight or penalties. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't about aesthetics. It was about control. The HOA didn't like being reminded they weren't prepared. My generator symbolized independence, something they didn't control, and that made me a target. So I did what any engineer would. I documented everything. I took photos of the installation, measurements showing it wasn't visible from the road, noise level readings, and even emails from the manufacturer explaining compliance with local code. I submitted a formal appeal. The HOA denied it in 48 hours. They claimed visual inconsistency, and future noise complaints as their reasons, even though no one had complained. Then came the fines. $50 the first day, $75 the next, then $100 daily. They stacked fast. By the end of the week, I owed $525 in non-compliance penalties. I emailed, called, even attended a board meeting to plead my case. But the board was firm. Cheryl sat stone-faced. The president, Ron Daly, smirked through my entire speech. "I'm sorry, Mr. Garrison," he said finally, "but rules are rules. We can't make exceptions." Except they did. I'd already seen exceptions made for others. One neighbor had a massive outdoor smoker that broke every guideline. Another had solar panels installed before approval, but no fine. When I brought this up, they ignored me. But fate had a funny way of stepping in. Just 2 weeks after my appeal was denied, another heat wave rolled through. Temperatures surged into the 100s. The local grid, still weakened from July's failure, crashed again. Another blackout. But this time I was ready. My generator kicked on within seconds. The hum was barely audible, like a distant purr. Inside, the air conditioning resumed. The fridge kept our food cold. My kids sighed with relief, curling up on the couch with their flashlights and comics. Then something strange happened. I noticed the lights on at the HOA clubhouse, 2 blocks away. It didn't make sense. The entire neighborhood was dark, including the streetlights. Yet the clubhouse, supposedly without backup power, glowed faintly through the trees. That's when it clicked. Months ago, when I was setting up the generator, I'd offered my services as an engineer to upgrade the HOA's outdated electrical panel for free. They declined, but they did ask me a few technical questions. Unbeknownst to them, when I expanded my generator's reach, I'd accidentally tied into a redundant conduit that fed auxiliary power to the clubhouse. They were running off my generator. I confirmed it by flipping a switch, one that cut power to the auxiliary conduit, and the clubhouse lights went dark. I flipped it back on. Lights returned. My generator was powering the HOA's emergency systems. Oh, this was going to be fun. The moment I realized the HOA's emergency systems were piggybacking on my generator, my frustration turned into a quiet, calculated fury. I'm not a vindictive person. I didn't move into this neighborhood to stir drama. I just wanted peace for my kids after everything we'd been through. But being fined, threatened, and bullied over a generator, only to discover that the same people punishing me were benefiting from it, that crossed the line. I spent the next few days gathering proof. As an engineer, I know the value of documentation. I set up a discrete logging system on my generator's smart controller, recording power usage. I installed a small, battery-backed camera on the line feeding the HOA clubhouse purely for verification purposes. I even programmed alerts to my phone if the clubhouse's power draw spiked. Everything was time-stamped, logged, and stored in the cloud. I didn't confront them right away. Instead, I wanted them to show their hand. That Friday, the HOA held another board meeting in the clubhouse. The blackout was still ongoing in many parts of town, and while other residents sat sweating in their homes, the board enjoyed cold drinks, bright lights, and air conditioning courtesy of, well, me. And that's what I decided to pay them a visit. When I walked into the meeting room, Cheryl stiffened, and Ron barely looked up from his notes. "Mr. Garrison," Ron muttered, "this is a closed session." "Oh, don't worry," I said casually. "I'm not here to argue anymore. I just came to check on the power." "What?" Cheryl said, confused. I gestured to the lights. "Isn't it incredible how this place still has electricity? It's almost like someone's providing it." Ron chuckled sarcastically. "The clubhouse has always had a backup battery system. Solar, if you must know." "Right," I nodded. "Except your backup battery system is rated for 8 hours. We're on hour 26. Ron's smile wavered. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. "Let's see how that solar system's holding up." And just like that, I flipped the switch. The lights in the clubhouse flickered, then they went dark. Air conditioning ceased, the projector shut off, the electric fans stopped humming. Gasps filled the room. Cheryl stood up. "What did you do?" I walked to the window, opened the curtain, and pointed toward my house, where my generator continued humming peacefully. "You're running your meetings, your clubhouse, your entire emergency system off my generator. The same one you fined me for having." Silence. "You've charged me $1,275 in fines," I continued. "You've harassed me with letters, threats, and false claims, all while your precious community board secretly benefited from the very device you tried to ban." Ron looked stunned. "That's impossible." "I have logs," I said, "video proof, power draw charts. You've been draining my system for 4 straight nights. I didn't mind until you fined me again yesterday." Cheryl stammered, "We didn't know." "Oh, but you should have," I said, voice steady. "Because when I volunteered to help modernize your electrical system months ago, you told me no. And now I find out the HOA accidentally tied into my line. That's not just incompetence, it's theft." "You can't prove any of this," Ron said sharply. I smiled. "Want to bet?" That night, I compiled every piece of evidence into a neat file. Timestamps, utility logs, voltage readings, even a side-by-side chart of my generator's load before and during the clubhouse use. I included a notarized letter detailing the timeline and photos of the accidental hookup. Then I sent the packet to the HOA board, my local city code enforcement officer, my lawyer, and just for good measure, a friend of mine who worked at the local news station. By the next morning, things escalated quickly. I received a very polite email from the HOA. Subject: Regenerator use. "Dear Mr. Garrison, we sincerely apologize for any misunderstanding regarding your generator. It appears there was a technical issue linking HOA infrastructure to your equipment. We are investigating immediately and will waive all fines related to this matter. We would also like to formally request a meeting with you to discuss proper power solutions moving forward. Respectfully, South Maple HOA Board." I didn't reply. Instead, I let the news team do their thing. By Monday, our local channel ran a small piece titled, "Homeowner Powers Entire HOA During Outage," while being fined for it. It didn't take long for the clip to go viral. Social media caught fire. Hundreds of comments lit up the HOA's official Facebook page. Neighbors began demanding transparency. That's when the real panic started. I received another email, this one marked urgent. Subject: HOA Leadership Meeting Request. "Mr. Garrison, we'd like to schedule an emergency board meeting to resolve this matter amicably. We appreciate your cooperation. HOA President Ron Daly." But I had my own plans. That Friday, I hosted a neighborhood Blackout recovery barbecue in my backyard. Free food, music, and cold drinks, powered by, you guessed it, the same generator. Over 50 neighbors showed up, including several who'd previously supported the HOA. Some even approached me with stories of how the HOA had intimidated them before, about gardens, decorations, paint colors, and more. "I never liked them," one woman whispered, pointing toward Cheryl as she peeked from behind her curtains. "But you stood up to them, and we're with you." That meant more to me than they knew. As dusk fell, I stepped onto a makeshift platform and raised a toast. To independence, to integrity, and to standing your ground when you know you're right. The crowd cheered. Behind them, I could see Ron watching from his porch, red-faced and silent. That night, I shut off the generator feed to the clubhouse. For good. The backlash and the boardroom. The neighborhood barbecue wasn't just a celebration. It was a turning point. The blackout had ironically shined a spotlight on the HOA's hypocrisy, and people who had once stayed silent were finally finding their voice. The next morning, I found a flyer taped to my door. It read, "Special HOA Meeting. Community attendance encouraged. This Friday at 6 p.m. in the clubhouse. Topic: Infrastructure Concerns and HOA Board Conduct. A public meeting? They hadn't done one of those in years. I wasn't surprised. The pressure had been building ever since the news report aired. The video, me calmly exposing the HOA while the lights went out behind them, had been shared over 40,000 times on social media. Even people from other states were weighing in, and in my neighborhood, people were angry, confused, and most of all, curious. The HOA, once feared, had finally cracked their polished surface. Beneath the rules and fines and landscaping codes, there was real dysfunction. So when Friday arrived, I put on a clean shirt, grabbed my folder of documents, and walked to the clubhouse with a quiet confidence. The room was packed. People stood shoulder to shoulder, many holding copies of the viral article. Some had even printed my power logs and highlighted the clubhouse energy usage. A few neighbors who had never spoken more than a hello to me gave me small nods of support. At the front of the room, Ron, Cheryl, and two other board members sat looking deeply uncomfortable. A young man in a blazer stood beside them. I recognized him from the city inspector's office. This was no ordinary HOA meeting. Ron cleared his throat. Thank you all for coming. Before we begin, I'd like to apologize on behalf of the board for any misunderstandings regarding the recent power issue. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. We're investigating the situation, Cheryl chimed in, and we're reviewing how the generator connection happened. It was an honest mistake. I raised my hand. Ron's jaw clenched. Mr. Garrison, with all due respect, I said calmly, an honest mistake doesn't explain why I received 3 fines while powering your emergency systems. You accused me of violating HOA policy while secretly benefiting from the same system. That's not a mistake. That's misconduct. The inspector beside them stepped forward. Actually, Mr. Garrison has provided us with documentation. Based on what we've reviewed, the HOA inadvertently tied into his generator during recent construction. That alone would have been forgivable. But the fines, I added, make it intentional, or at least negligent. Someone in the crowd called out, "So what happens now?" The inspector glanced at the board. We're recommending a temporary suspension of the HOA board's operational powers, pending further investigation. An interim oversight committee will be appointed. The room erupted. People clapped, whistled, even cheered. One neighbor shouted, "About time!" Another added, "We need a whole new board." Ron stood up, face red. "You can't just strip us of authority based on one man's story." "He's not the only one," said a voice from the back. It was Linda, an elderly widow whose garden had been ripped out by HOA orders. "They fined me $200 for growing tomatoes in a planter," she said, but never told Cheryl her son's jet skis were illegal in the driveway for months. Another voice joined in. "They towed my truck when I was moving in. I never even got a warning." More hands went up. More voices followed, story after story. Years of quiet resentment pouring out. For the first time, the board wasn't in control. The meeting ended with the appointment of a temporary oversight group. 5 residents, including myself, elected by a show of hands. Our first order of business? A full audit of board activities and finances. It felt surreal. Just a few weeks earlier, I was being bullied over a generator. Now I was part of a movement to change how our community worked. That weekend, we held our first oversight meeting in my garage. Symbolic maybe, but also practical. We didn't trust the clubhouse yet. We sorted through paper trails, vendor receipts, contractor logs, and it didn't take long before patterns emerged. Inflated invoices for landscaping.
It just good place when there.
Duplicate payments to a pressure washing company, owned by Cheryl's cousin.
Always on one and I'm on one forever.
Emergency maintenance calls that were never performed. The HOA had been quietly bleeding money. When we compiled our initial report and shared it with residents, the reaction was swift. Calls for resignation, demands for refunds. Someone even launched a Reform Our HOA Facebook group that gained 300 members in a day. Ron and Cheryl tried damage control, but the community had tasted transparency, and they weren't going back. A week later, I received a call from a local radio station. "We loved the story," the host said. "Would you be open to coming on air and talking about what happened?" I hesitated. "I'm not a hero," I told her. "I just wanted to keep my family safe." "Exactly," she said. "That's what makes it powerful." The interview aired the next morning. I told the story honestly about the fines, the generator, the quiet revenge of flipping the switch. But I also talked about the bigger picture, community accountability, standing up for your rights, and how a little integrity can spark big change. And by the time I got home, my inbox was flooded. People from across the country sent messages.
We're dealing with something similar. Thanks for sharing your story. You inspired us to challenge our HOA too.
It was overwhelming and empowering. The days that followed felt like stepping into a new world, one where neighbors actually talked, where the rules weren't weapons and where leadership was earned, not abused. We had begun healing from years of quiet injustice. The temporary oversight committee kept meeting weekly, rotating between homes. We weren't politicians or professionals, just residents who finally had a say. I was amazed at how quickly people volunteered. An accountant offered to review HOA finances. A teacher helped with community outreach. And even Linda, the elderly lady with the tomato garden, became our unofficial historian, digging up old HOA documents from her basement. But the story wasn't over. One morning, I got a knock at my door. It was Ron. He looked different. No polished polo, no smug attitude, just jeans, a jacket, and tired eyes. "Can we talk?" he asked. I hesitated, then stepped outside. "I came to apologize," he said. "I never meant for things to get so ugly. At first, the generator thing just seemed like a small oversight, but then Cheryl wanted to fine you to make a point. I should have stopped it. I didn't." I crossed my arms. "Why now?" He looked away. "Because I've lost everything that mattered in this neighborhood. Respect, trust. My wife's been embarrassed to go outside. My own son asked if we were the bad guys. And maybe we were." It wasn't the kind of apology I expected. But it wasn't for me to judge whether it was sincere. What mattered was what came next. At our next committee meeting, we voted on a formal community election to replace the entire HOA board. The idea received overwhelming support. Flyers were printed, rules for nominations and voting were outlined, with help from a lawyer who lived on our block. For the first time in a decade, everyone was invited to choose their leadership. People stepped up. Residents who had once kept their heads down were now proudly declaring their intentions to run. I was nominated without even applying. I wanted to decline at first. I wasn't interested in power. But my wife gently placed her hand on mine and said, "You didn't start this to win. You started this to protect what matters. That's exactly why you should say yes." So I did. Election day felt like a festival. Kids painted signs, neighbors grilled food in front yards. People walked to the clubhouse with smiles instead of dread. For the first time, it felt like our neighborhood again. When the votes were counted, I was elected as the new HOA president, with 82% of the vote. Cheryl and the others quietly packed up and left their posts. No drama, no final speech, just the soft sound of a chapter closing. But I didn't celebrate by sitting in a big chair or enforcing new rules. I celebrated by doing what started this whole thing: helping. We organized a community workday where residents repaired fences, painted curbs, and cleaned up the playground together. The old fines were reevaluated and, in many cases, dismissed. Linda's tomato garden was not only restored, it won a small community award for Best Garden Display. And the HOA documents? They were moved online. available for anyone to see. And the generator? It remained in my yard, still humming quietly, ready if ever needed again. But this time, it was no longer a secret weapon. It was a symbol of preparedness, of resistance, and most of all, of unity. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the streetlights flickered on, I stood in my driveway, watching kids play. My wife joined me, holding 2 mugs of tea. Can you believe all this happened because of a power live? We clinked mugs and watched the neighborhood breathe, no longer in the dark, no longer powerless.